The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a cable bill and a pizza coupon. No return address, just my name in careful block letters. I almost tossed it with the junk mail, but something about its weight made me pause. My name is Mara, and until that moment, I thought I had the kind of life people envied. Kind where you post perfect family photos on social media and actually mean the happy captions. I stood in my sunny kitchen, where my daughter Ivy's artwork plastered the fridge and the morning's breakfast dishes still waited in the sink. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, like it knew it was about to change everything. Inside was a single sheet of paper and 3 photographs. The first line read, "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but your husband is having an affair." My hands started shaking so badly I had to set the letter down on the counter. The photos spilled out, Caleb, my husband of 8 years, with a woman I'd never seen before. They were leaving what looked like a hotel, his hand on the small of her back. In another, they were kissing outside a restaurant I recognized downtown. The third showed them sharing a booth at our favorite date night spot, their fingers intertwined across the table. Timestamp on the photos was from last week, when Caleb said he was working late on a big client project. I must have read the letter 10 times, trying to make the words say something different. The anonymous writer claimed to be a concerned friend who'd witnessed their relationship developing over the past 6 months. 6 months. While I'd been teaching 3rd graders and driving Ivy to ballet, my husband had been building a whole separate life. My phone buzzed, making me jump. A text from Caleb. "Running late tonight? Don't wait up." I typed and deleted responses until my fingers hurt. Finally, I just wrote, "We need to talk when you get home." The hours crawled by. I picked up Ivy from my mom's house, helped her with homework, made dinner, and tucked her in, all while feeling like I was moving underwater. Every time I looked at her sweet face, so much like her father's, my chest ached. It was almost midnight when I heard Caleb's key in the lock. He tried to sneak in quietly, probably expecting me to be asleep. Instead, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the letter and photos laid out in front of me. "Hey," he said, freezing in the doorway. "What are you still doing up?" I pushed the photos across the table. "Who is she?" Color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, closed it, then slumped into the chair across from me. "Mara, I can explain." 6 months, Caleb? 6 months of lying to my face. "It's not what you think," he started, but I cut him off. "Really? Because I think you've been sleeping with another woman while I've been here, building a life with you, thinking we were happy." His eyes darted to the stairs, checking if Ivy might hear us. "Keep your voice down." That's what broke me. Him trying to manage how I expressed my own devastation. "You don't get to tell me how to react to this," I said, my voice sharp and quiet. "Who sent these?" "I don't know," he said, running his hands through his hair. "Look, her name is Sienna." It started as just, "I don't know. But I want to fix this." "We can fix this." I stared at him, this man I thought I knew better than anyone. "Fix what? The lying? The cheating? Or just the fact that you got caught?" He reached for my hand across the table. I pulled back like his touch might burn me. "I'll end it," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes. We have Ivy to think about." The mention of our daughter felt like a punch to the gut. "Don't you dare use her as a shield," I whispered. "Not after what you've done." I stood up, gathering the photos and letter. "I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow, you can explain to our daughter why Daddy won't be living here anymore." As I walked away, he called after me, "Mara, please. I love you." I paused in the doorway, not turning around. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think you do." I didn't expect my mother to side with Caleb. That's what hurt the most, sitting in her pristine living room the next morning, watching her stir her tea with precise movements while telling me to think this through carefully. "Marriage takes work, Mara," she said, as if I'd complained about him leaving dishes in the sink. "Your father and I have been through rough patches too." "Did Dad sleep with his coworker for 6 months?" I asked, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Did he take her to your anniversary dinner spot? My mother's spoon clinked against her cup. Don't be dramatic. Think about Ivy. Think about your position in the community. The Hargroves are important people, and divorce is so messy. Of course, she'd worry about appearances. Clara Eldridge, queen of the country club set, couldn't have her daughter causing a scandal. I stood up, my coffee untouched. I need to pick up Ivy from school, I said, though it was only 10 in the morning. Sit down, my mother said firmly. Your father and I have discussed this, and we think you should consider marriage counseling before making any rash decisions. You discussed my marriage with Dad? The betrayal stung fresh. When? Caleb called us this morning. He's devastated, sweetheart. He made a mistake, but he wants to make it right. My hands started shaking. He called you before I could? He's trying to save your marriage, she said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. He knows he messed up, but… My phone buzzed. A text from Tess. Why is your husband having lunch with some blonde at Cafe Luna? Want me to key his car? I showed my mother the text. Still think he's devastated? Her face tightened. Perhaps there's more to the situation than… Stop. I grabbed my purse. Just stop defending him. He's not the person you think he is. As I reached the door, she called after me. What about the fundraising gala next week? The school board is expecting both of you. Turned back incredulous. My marriage is falling apart and you're worried about a gala? Your father chairs that board, Mara. It would look terrible if… If what? If people found out your perfect family isn't so perfect? The drive to Cafe Luna took 7 minutes. I spotted them through the window, Caleb and Sienna, heads bent close together over coffee cups. She was younger than I'd expected, prettier. The kind of woman who made men feel important. I walked in before I could talk myself out of it. The bell above the door announced my arrival, and Caleb's head snapped up. Color drained from his face. Mara, he started, standing quickly. This isn't, we're just discussing. Discussing what? I asked quietly. How to fix our marriage. Sienna stayed seated, her manicured fingers wrapped around her cup. You must be the wife, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Caleb's told me so much about you. Funny, he's never mentioned you. I turned to Caleb. Does your mother know about her? Since you're so concerned about family these days. Let's talk about this somewhere private, he said, reaching for my arm. I stepped back. No need. I just came to tell you I've made an appointment with a divorce lawyer for Thursday. You can have your mother call them directly, since that's apparently how we're handling things now. Mara, please, he said, but I was already walking away. Outside, my phone buzzed again. My mother, don't do anything hasty. Come back and we'll discuss this properly. I turned off my phone and drove to the elementary school where I taught. My classroom was empty during lunch break, the walls covered in my students' artwork. I sat at my desk, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of third-grade creations, and finally let myself cry. A soft knock made me wipe my eyes quickly. Vivian Hargrove stood in the doorway, her face lined with concern. I think, she said quietly, we need to talk about my son. Vivian set a folder on my kitchen table 3 days after showing up at my classroom. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, spreading out bank statements and credit card bills I'd never seen before. I found these in Caleb's office while he was at work, she said quietly. I thought you should know what you're dealing with. The numbers swam before my eyes. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Credit card charges at hotels, restaurants, jewelry stores. And most damning, regular payments to Blake Consulting Services going back 8 months. Sienna Blake, I whispered. He's been funding her business? Vivian nodded, her face tight with disappointment. Nearly $200,000 as far as I can tell. That's why I've been getting excuses about why he can't help with your father-in-law's medical bills. My stomach lurched. We'd been struggling to cover Henry's cancer treatments, while Caleb was bankrolling his girlfriend's startup. Does he think I'm stupid? I asked more to myself than Vivian. All those times he said we couldn't afford Ivy's dance classes. My phone buzzed. Caleb, we need to talk about the house. I'm coming over. He's on his way here, I said, gathering the papers with shaking hands. You should go. Vivian stood but hesitated. Mara, be careful. When men like Caleb feel cornered. The front door opened before she could finish. Caleb stopped short, seeing his mother in our kitchen. Mom, what are you doing here? Leaving, she said coldly, squeezing my hand as she passed him. Caleb watched her go, then turned to me. What was that about? I slid the bank statements across the table. Want to explain Blake Consulting Services? Color drained from his face. You've been going through my private accounts? Private? We're married. Or did you forget that while spending our savings on your girlfriend? It's not what you think, he started, but I cut him off. $200,000, Caleb. While your father needs cancer treatments. While I'm working summer school to afford Ivy's activities. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I used to find endearing. Sienna's business is a solid investment. Once it takes off, investment. I laughed, the sound harsh even to my ears. Is that what you call stealing from your family? I didn't steal anything. That money was what? Yours? 'Cause last I checked, we both contributed to those accounts. For our future. For Ivy's future. He slumped into a chair. I'll pay it back. Sienna's company is about to land a major contract. Stop. I pressed my palms flat against the table to keep them from shaking. Just stop lying. For once in your life, tell the truth. Something shifted in his expression. The truth? Fine. Truth is I was suffocating here, playing the perfect husband in your perfect little world. Sienna sees me for who I really am. And who is that? A thief? A liar? Someone who wants more than PDA meetings and dance recitals. He slammed his hand on the table, making me flinch. Someone who deserves. Deserves what? I asked quietly. To destroy your family? To steal from your dying father? Heavy footsteps on the stairs made us both freeze. Ivy stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Why are you fighting? She asked in a small voice. Caleb's face softened. Princess, we're just. Go back upstairs, sweetie, I said firmly. Daddy's leaving. No, I'm not, Caleb said, standing. This is my house too. I pulled out my phone. Leave now or I call the police and show them these bank statements. Your choice. He stared at me for a long moment, then grabbed his keys. This isn't over, he said quietly. You're right, I replied, watching him walk toward the door. It's just beginning. After he left, I sank into a chair, my hands finally allowing themselves to shake. My phone lit up with a text from Vivian. I've made an appointment with my lawyer tomorrow. It's time to protect what's yours. I looked at the scattered papers on the table, each one a record of betrayal, and felt something harden inside me. Caleb wanted to play games? Fine. But he was about to learn I wasn't the same woman who'd married him 8 years ago. And I played to win. The divorce papers sat unsigned on my lawyer's desk while Ivy sobbed in the waiting room. Caleb had brought her, a calculated move I should have seen coming. She'd been begging to go home with him for the past hour. Maybe we should reschedule, my lawyer suggested, glancing at the closed door. I pressed my fingers to my temples. He's using her. He knows exactly what he's doing. Mommy! Ivy's cry pierced through the wall. Please, I want to go with Daddy. My hand shook as I reached for the pen. Caleb's voice drifted through, soft and comforting, playing the perfect father. The same voice he'd used to lie to me for months. Tess burst into the office, her face flushed. Don't sign anything. You need to see this. She thrust her phone at me. On the screen was Sienna's business website, featuring their newest investment partner, Caleb Hargrove. Company announcement included a photo of them together, his arm around her waist, both beaming at the camera. Look at the date, Tess said quietly. 3 months ago. Before the anonymous letter. Before I knew anything. He's not just funding her business, I realized. He's part owner. My lawyer leaned forward. That changes things significantly. If he used marital assets to purchase ownership. Another cry from Ivy cut through my thoughts. I stood up, my decision crystallizing. I'll be right back. In the waiting room, Caleb sat with Ivy in his lap, stroking her hair. Perfect picture of fatherly devotion. He looked up, his expression carefully concerned. She's upset, he said softly. Maybe we should talk about shared custody. When were you going to tell me about your partnership with Sienna? His hand stilled in Ivy's hair. What? Your company announcement. From 3 months ago. The one where you're celebrating with your new business partner. Honey, he said to Ivy, setting her down. Go get a snack from the vending machine. Once she was gone, his facade cracked. You're having me followed? Don't flatter yourself. It's called Google. I crossed my arms. So that's where the money went. Not just an investment, you bought yourself a new life. It's not like that. The opportunity came up. Save it. You can explain it to the forensic accountant. His eyes narrowed. You wouldn't. Try me. Think about what you're doing, he said, lowering his voice. If you push this, it gets ugly. For everyone. Including Ivy. The threat hung in the air between us. I thought about our daughter, already struggling with the separation. About the scandal my mother feared so much. About everything I could lose. Then I thought about everything I'd already lost. No, I said quietly. You don't get to threaten me anymore. I walked back into the lawyer's office and picked up the pen. But instead of signing the original agreement, I wrote a new set of demands. Full custody, forensic audit, and no contact until the financial investigation was complete. When I emerged, Caleb was gone. Ivy sat alone by the vending machine, clutching an unopened candy bar. Where's Daddy? She asked. He had to go to work, sweetie. Ich knelt beside her. How about we get ice cream instead? She looked at the door, then back at me. Is Daddy bad now? My heart cracked. No, honey. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes that hurt people they love. But that doesn't make them bad. Like when I broke your necklace and didn't tell you? I pulled her close, breathing in her sweet shampoo smell. Something like that. But bigger. Will he fix it? Like I fixed your necklace? I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. I don't know, baby. But I promise you we're going to be okay. My phone buzzed, a text from Vivian. Caleb just cleared out his father's medical fund. All of it. I'm so sorry. I held Ivy tighter, feeling her small arms wrap around my neck. Sometimes the hardest part of protecting someone is knowing when to stop trying to save everyone else. The first time I saw Elliot Jennings, he was arguing with the school secretary about paint colors. I'd stayed late to grade papers, and his voice carried down the empty hallway, calm but firm, insisting that beige wasn't an acceptable choice for the new library walls. Children need color, he said. They need life. I hadn't meant to stop and listen, but something in his voice made me pause. Maybe it was the passion about something as simple as paint colors, or maybe it was just that I hadn't heard a man speak without manipulation in months. Miss Eldridge. The secretary spotted me. You're on the renovation committee. What do you think about the library colors? I found myself drawn into a conversation about warm versus cool tones with a stranger whose eyes crinkled when he smiled. He introduced himself as the project architect, a widower with a daughter in kindergarten. Nora, he said. She's in Miss Chen's class. Oh, the quiet one who draws horses, I replied, remembering the shy girl who always sat alone at recess. His face lit up. You know her work? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer, emergency. Caleb's filing for emergency custody. Claims you're unstable. Call ASAP. The phone slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, clattering on the floor. Elliot picked it up, accidentally glimpsing the message before handing it back. Are you okay? He asked quietly. I wasn't. I really wasn't. I need to go, I managed, but my legs wouldn't move. Sit, he said gently, pulling up a chair. Just breathe for a minute. The secretary had disappeared, leaving us alone in the office. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to stop the room from spinning. He's trying to take my daughter, I whispered, more to myself than to Elliot. The quiet one who draws cats, he said, making me look up in confusion. That's my Nora. Not horses. I wanted you to know you're not the only parent here trying to hold it together. Something about his simple honesty broke through my panic. How do you do it? Being a single parent? Badly most days, he admitted. But we survive. Sometimes that's enough. My phone buzzed again, Tess this time. Don't panic. I've got dirt on Caleb that'll shut this down. Meet me at Joe's in 20. I stood up, steadier now. Thank you. For the paint colors and everything else. Anytime, he said, then added, for what it's worth, I think forest green would be perfect for the library. Deep but full of life. At Joe's diner, Tess was waiting with a manila envelope and a grim expression. You're not going to like this, she said, sliding it across the table. Inside were photos of Caleb and Sienna at a jewelry store, examining engagement rings. Timestamp was from yesterday. There's more, Tess said quietly. The company they started? It's failing. They've been taking out massive loans, using your house as collateral. My house. The one I'd bought before we were married, that he'd insisted we refinance together last year. He's going to lose everything, Tess continued. The custody filing? It's a leverage play. He needs your assets to keep his new life afloat. I stared at the photos, at Caleb's smile as he pointed to different rings. The same smile he'd had when he proposed to me when we bought our house when Ivy was born. My phone lit up with a text from Elliot. Library committee meeting tomorrow. I could use an ally in the war against beige. Something shifted inside me like a key turning in a lock. I looked at Tess. I need you to help me do something, I said. Something that might be terrible but necessary. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Whatever you need. I need to destroy him, I said quietly. Not for revenge. For survival. Tess nodded, understanding darkening her eyes. Where do we start? I pulled out my phone, typing a response to Elliot. Count me in! Some battles are worth fighting. And some, I was learning, were worth winning at any cost. The forensic accountant's report landed on my kitchen table the same morning Ivy announced she wanted to live with her father. 2 bombs, minutes apart, leaving nothing but silence and debris. He said I can have a puppy, Ivy said, pushing her cereal around the bowl. And Sienna makes really good pancakes. I stared at the report summary page. Systematic fraud, embezzlement, forged signatures. The numbers blurred as Ivy continued talking about her weekend at Caleb's new house. And they're getting married next month. Sienna wants me to be the flower girl. The spoon clattered from my hand. What? Don't be mad, Ivy pleaded. Daddy said you'd be mad, but when did he tell you this? Yesterday. After he picked me up from school. My head snapped up. He what? He said you knew, Ivy's voice got smaller. Did you not know? I grabbed my phone, dialing the school. Yes, Caleb had picked her up. Yes, he'd shown proper documentation, the emergency custody filing I'd been fighting. The one my lawyer assured me wouldn't hold up. The one that apparently already had. My hand shook as I called my lawyer. Straight to voicemail. Then Tess. No answer. Finally, Vivian. I just heard, she said before I could speak. He's filed for full custody, Mara. He's claiming you're emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible. I looked at the forensic report again. But the proof is inadmissible. The records were obtained without proper authorization. All those careful plans, all that evidence, worthless. Because I'd tried to play by rules while Caleb rewrote them. Mommy. Ivy's voice wavered. Are you crying? I touched my cheek, surprised to find it wet. No, baby. Just tired. My phone buzzed. Elliot, heard about court filing. Need anything? Before I could respond, another text came through. From Sienna. Let's talk. For Ivy's sake. Can I go to my room? Ivy asked. Daddy said I should pack some stuff. Something inside me cracked. No, honey. You're not going anywhere. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Caleb had planned this perfectly. The custody filing, the wedding announcement, using our daughter as both shield and weapon. I texted Sienna back. Where? She suggested the cafe where I'd first confronted them. Of course she did. I need to run an errand, I told Ivy. Want to visit Grandma Clara? My mother answered the door with that look, the one that said she'd already heard. Really, Mara? Making that poor child choose sides? Not now, I said, pushing past her. Just watch her for an hour. Sienna was already waiting, an engagement ring glittering on her finger. My ring. The one Caleb had given me 8 years ago. Before you say anything, she started. This isn't what you think. Really? Because I think you're wearing my life like a costume. She twisted the ring. Caleb's changed. The business problems, they've made him realize that he needs my assets to stay afloat. I slid the forensic report across the table. Or that marrying you before the fraud charges hit will make it harder to trace. Her face paled slightly. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're not the first young, ambitious woman he's convinced to trust him. Just the latest. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone, showing her an old news article about another failed business. Another female partner left holding the bag. He'll do it again, I said quietly. And when he does, you won't have my daughter as leverage. She stared at the article, then at me. Why are you showing me this? Because you're not my enemy, I replied, standing. You're just the next me. Walking out, I texted Elliot. Actually, yes. I need help burning everything down. His response came immediately. Library committee meets in 10. We can start with beige. I smiled for the first time that day. Sometimes the only way forward is through the flames. Sienna called me at midnight, her voice shaking. He's gone. With everything. I sat up in bed, already reaching for my shoes. What do you mean, everything? The company accounts, the wedding fund, my savings. She choked back a sob. He even took my grandmother's jewelry. Said he was having it cleaned for the wedding. A bitter laugh escaped me. Let me guess, right after you added him to your accounts? How did you know? Because that's what he does. I grabbed my keys. Where are you? At the house. Your old house. He gave me the keys last week, said we'd move in after. She stopped. There's something else. Something worse. I was already in my car. What? He took Ivy. The world tilted sideways. What do you mean, he took Ivy? She's at his apartment. No, Sienna whispered. He picked her up hours ago, said they were going on a surprise trip. I thought he'd told you. I hung up, dialing Vivian's number with trembling fingers. She answered on the first ring. I just got a call from Henry's care facility, she said before I could speak. Caleb cleared out his medical fund. All of it. They're threatening to discharge him. He has Ivy. Silence. Then, I'm calling the police. No, I said sharply. He'll disappear completely if we do that. I know where he's going. The lake house. Where we'd spent our honeymoon, where he'd always talked about retiring. Where he kept his emergency cash and spare passport. Called Elliot next. I need your help. But it's dangerous. I'll meet you there, he said without hesitation. Text me the address. The lake house was dark when I arrived, but Caleb's car sat in the driveway. Elliot pulled up minutes later, killing his headlights. Stay here, I told him. If anything happens, he grabbed my hand. Nothing's going to happen. But I called Tess anyway. She's bringing the police in 15 minutes. Inside, I found them in the master bedroom. Ivy asleep on the bed, Caleb sitting beside her with a packed suitcase at his feet. I wondered who would figure it out first, he said quietly. You or Sienna? Why? My voice cracked. Why take everything from everyone who loved you? Because it was never enough. He stood, moving between me and Ivy. Their love, your love, it all came with expectations. Be successful, be stable, be perfect. So you decided to be a thief instead? I decided to be free. He reached for Ivy. And she deserves that too. Freedom from all these expectations. Don't touch her. I stepped forward. You want to run? Fine. But you leave her out of this. She's my daughter too. No, I said quietly. She's your shield. Just like I was. Just like Sienna. Just like every person you've used to hide from your own failures. His face twisted. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I pulled out my phone, showing him the screen. And so does the SEC. Tess works for them now, did you know that? Has for years. She's been building a case since the first time you forged my signature. Color drained from his face. You're lying. Check your accounts. The ones you thought were secret. They're already frozen. He lunged for his suitcase, but I was faster. Spilled open, spilling cash and jewelry across the floor. Ivy stirred. Mommy? Daddy? It's okay, baby, I said, not taking my eyes off Caleb. We're just talking. About my surprise trip? Caleb's shoulders slumped. Side, I heard car doors closing. No trip tonight, sweetheart, I said. But I promise tomorrow we'll do something special. Just us. And Daddy? I watched as red and blue lights began flashing through the windows. Daddy has his own trip to take. Caleb didn't resist when the officers entered. He just looked at me, finally seeing me clearly for the first time in years. I did love you, he said softly. In my way. I know, I replied. That's what made it so easy to destroy you. I gathered Ivy in my arms as they led him away, her sleepy questions mixing with the sound of sirens. Side, Elliot waited with Nora in the car, ready to take us home. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about surviving them. 1 year later, I found myself back in the school library, now painted in deep forest green. Ivy and Nora sat cross-legged in the reading nook, sharing a book about horses or maybe cats. It didn't matter anymore. The SEC finished their investigation, Tess said, joining me at the window. Caleb's looking at 8 to 10 years. I watched our daughters laughing together. Did they recover any of the money? Some. Enough to restore Henry's medical fund, at least. She hesitated. Sienna's been cooperating. She wants to make amends. Good for her. I meant it. Revenge had lost its taste months ago, replaced by something quieter. Something like peace. Elliot appeared in the doorway, paint swatches in hand. Ready for the cafeteria renovation? No more beige, I warned, making him smile. Never again. The wedding ring on my finger caught the afternoon light, different from my first, simpler but somehow more solid. Like the man who gave it to me. Mom, Ivy called from the reading nook. Can I show Nora the letter? My heart stuttered. The letter had arrived last week, Caleb's first communication since his sentencing. I'd let Ivy read it alone, watching her face as she absorbed her father's words. If you wanna, honey. The girls bent their heads together over the paper. I couldn't hear what they were whispering, but I saw Nora squeeze Ivy's hand. You okay? Elliot asked quietly. Getting there. I leaned into him. He asked to see her. What are you going to do? Let her decide. When she's ready. My mother hadn't understood that choice. He's still her father, she'd argued. But she hadn't seen Ivy's face that night at the lake house, or the weeks of nightmares that followed. Some wounds need time before you can even think about healing. Miss Eldridge! A small voice interrupted my thoughts. One of my students stood clutching a familiar-looking envelope. This was in the library drop box. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a check, a large one, and a note in Sienna's handwriting, for Ivy's college fund. I'm sorry. Karma's funny sometimes, Tess mused, reading over my shoulder. Not karma, I corrected. Choice. We all made choices. Vivian visited sometimes, bringing photos and stories from Caleb's childhood. Not to excuse, but to understand. To help Ivy understand. She'd chosen family over loyalty to her son's actions. Even my mother had chosen, finally, to see beyond appearances. She'd been the one to suggest therapy for Ivy to help her process everything. Mom, Ivy appeared at my side. Can we get ice cream? Nora's never had the Superman flavor. Never! I gasped in mock horror. Elliot, what kind of father are you? He raised his hands in surrender. I plead guilty to boring ice cream choices. Then we better fix that. I gathered my things, watching our daughters race ahead, already planning their orders. You know, Tess said thoughtfully, revenge stories usually end with someone destroyed. But this isn't about destruction anymore, I finished. It's about reconstruction. Sighed, Ivy and Nora waited by the car, giggling about something only they understood. Elliot's hand found mine, steady and warm. Ready? He asked. I thought about the letter in Ivy's backpack, the check in my purse, the paint swatches for next week's renovation. About all the ways life moves forward, even when you think it's stuck in the past. Almost, I said, pulling out my phone. I had one last text to send to Sienna. Thank you for choosing differently. Then I put the phone away and joined my family. Some stories don't end with a bang or even a whimper. They end with Superman ice cream and green library walls and the quiet understanding that healing isn't a destination but a journey. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find people to share that journey with you.
I apologize, but it appears that there is a problem with my car. I was notified that I needed to pay off my balance right away in order to keep my card active. My regular credit card payment hasn't been processed yet, the customer support agent mentioned. I had assumed that I had enough money in an account for automatic withdrawals, but when I looked at my bank balance, it was a startling $2. My spouse is the only other individual with the ability to withdraw money from this account. I hurriedly reached for my phone to call the police, feeling a wave of panic. My name is Emily, and I work as a web designer. I am 29 years old. I like that my employment lets me choose my own hours, so I can be flexible. Even though I can meet with clients electronically, I still prefer in-person meetings since they allow me to express my ideas more effectively. I frequently find myself working nonstop toward project deadlines, forgoing sleep in order to be productive. My spouse, Matthew, with whom I got married a year ago, helps me a lot to keep up this fast pace. He was the liaison on a project I was working on for his company a few years ago, which is when we first got together. We were married, and he moved into my apartment after 2 years of dating. But there has been a serious issue with Matthew's parents lately. They frequently experience financial difficulties and are fairly carefree about money. Because I make more money than Matthew, we split our living expenses evenly. I pay all of our bills at the beginning of each month, and he pays me back half at the beginning of the following. We typically find this arrangement to be effective, but the current financial situation has created unanticipated hardship. Matthew seemed particularly agitated when I brought up this month's costs to him, as I regularly do, and remarked, "Look, money's a bit tight right now. Can I pay my portion of the bills after I get paid again?" Perplexed, I inquired, "What do you understand by tight?" "All I'm requesting is half of the costs." "I get that, but I'm completely strapped until my next payday," he retorted. It had just been 8 days since his last payday, which surprised me. His evasive answers and unwillingness to elaborate were annoying me. "Will you kindly explain why you're unable to pay? And what's this about helping your parents?" I persisted. After hesitating, Matthew declared, "There's nothing suspicious. I was just trying to help my parents. I sent them some money because they claimed that they were having some financial difficulties." Hearing this was unexpected, because Matthew's parents were thought to be well off. His mother had a part-time job, and his father worked full-time. I found it incomprehensible that they required money so quickly. If both of your parents are employed, why do they still require financial support? There has never been a problem with this. I've been helping them for a while, Matthew said. I gave in when they requested extra money, starting this month. I knew how important it was to provide for my family, yet this realization unnerved me. All right, just make sure you pay your share by the end of the month, I firmly responded. Matthew has never changed his mind once he makes a decision. He is a naturally obstinate person. Even while I adore him for who he is, there are moments when this quality causes problems. I decided to give up and wait for his next paycheck, knowing that pressuring him any further would not help. But ever since then, he's constantly come up with ways to avoid paying his share of the bills. Our relationship has become more tense as a result of this habit, making money conversations more difficult than they once were. Even when Matthew does make a cash contribution, it is insufficient to meet our needs. Even though we are legally still married, it has been about 8 months since he stopped doing his share, and I am starting to lose tolerance. I'm left to take care of all the domestic duties and bills by myself. Thinking about this leaves me feeling stupid and helpless, as though the constant pressure has emptied me out. When Matthew returned home one late evening, his cheeks flushed from booze, I was no longer able to contain my annoyance. "Why didn't you call if you were going to be out drinking?" I asked in a loud voice. "I waited for you while preparing dinner." "Sorry, a colleague invited me out unexpectedly," was his casual response. "Couldn't you have sent a message?" I shot back. "I already asked that you keep me updated. You can't just leave me hanging." "Please don't start shouting as soon as I enter. It's not friendly," he shot back. I was taken aback. "What are you trying to say? Why am I being held responsible?" His scornful expression was like a slap across the face, making me even more enraged. "How can you afford to go out drinking when you can't even contribute to our bills?" I asked him frankly. "After working every day and taking care of all the housework, I'm also worn out. Could we at least cease giving your parents money if you are unable to contribute financially?" Matthew tensed up. "How come?" "Why? My family's business is that. it is not a matter for you. This answer hurts. Matthew, how about the rest of us? Are we not also family? To you, what am I? We are married and sharing a home here. This is really annoying. What does it matter? You earn more than I do anyway, he said dismissively, as if that justified his lack of contribution. His sense of entitlement infuriated me further. The only reason Matthew can live so comfortably is that I've been shouldering our financial responsibilities alone, but his recent behavior and attitudes have made me question how sustainable our situation is. As I've been covering all our expenses, I couldn't help but think, would a simple thank you or an apology for the inconvenience be too much to ask? His irrational arguments left me utterly speechless. His arrogance was bewildering. With our tempers flaring, I realized a rational conversation was out of the question at that moment. So I suggested we revisit the discussion the next day. The following day, as I was preparing dinner and waiting for Matthew to return, I heard the front door creak open. "Welcome home," I called out, but received no reply. Then the living room door swung open, and to my surprise, there stood my husband with his parents. "Mom, Dad, what brings you here?" I asked, taken aback. With a smug grin, Matthew said, "My parents have something they want to discuss with you. Let's get to the point," he prompted, urging them to speak. My father-in-law, looking somewhat apologetic, started, "I apologize for the sudden visit. We've come to talk about the financial support Matthew has been providing us." "What's this about?" I asked, confused. "Oh, Emily, could you please ease up on Matthew?" his mother interjected, catching me completely off guard. "Matthew has been sending us money each month considering our well-being. It's unfair for you to accuse him," she added. "What are you saying?" "I'm just asking for our living expenses to be managed properly," I replied, trying to contain my frustration. "Listen, Emily," his father chimed in. "I hate to bring this up, but we're practically family, aren't we? If your own family were struggling, wouldn't you lend a hand? That's what anyone would expect, right?" His mother continued, "Your father-in-law and I have been experiencing financial strain lately, so we rely on Matthew to continue supporting us. Therefore, you should handle all the living expenses for both of you." This presumption was staggering. The idea that I should carry the entire financial burden for us felt incredibly unfair. Matthew's parents imposing on our finances without considering the strain it put on our marriage was troubling. I realized this was not just about money. It was about respect and boundaries within our family dynamics. They assumed it was only natural for me to cover all the costs. Unable to bear it any longer, I finally snapped. Enough is enough. What do you think I've been doing? I manage all the household chores and cover every single expense. How is that fair? Isn't it what married couples are supposed to do? Support each other? Or are you just that selfish? Upon hearing his mother's scoff, my husband, who was sitting beside me, couldn't hold back a chuckle. That evening, despite my attempts to bring reason into our conversation, they remained stubborn and left well after 1 p.m. Once they were gone, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. My husband coldly handed me signed divorce papers. Shocked, I asked, "What's this?" "It means exactly what it says," he replied sharply, looking down at me. He added, "If you persist in defying me, I'll end our marriage." "Are you serious?" I asked, incredulous. "Absolutely. If you don't want a divorce, then simply obey. Your role is to follow, not lead." I knew I should have stood my ground, but I felt utterly drained. Perhaps trying to reason with Matthew before things got worse was futile. Maybe divorce was the inevitable solution. The decision came swiftly. The next day, I signed the divorce papers Matthew had given me and headed to City Hall. The documents were processed quickly, and just like that, I was single again. Now free from the constraints of my marriage, I felt a surge of relief and empowerment. I decided it was time to find my place and embrace independent living fully. Feeling rejuvenated, I indulged in a shopping trip to the department store. Working predominantly from home, and with outings limited mainly to client meetings, it had been quite some time since I splurged on myself, especially given the recent financial strain. Today was a new beginning. Determined to treat myself, I headed to the women's clothing section. After trying on a few dresses, I chose 2 favorites. At the checkout, I handed over my credit card, but the cashier's troubled expression made my heart sink. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It seems we're unable to process this card." "What? That's impossible," I replied, puzzled. "I just used it recently to buy a new tablet for work without any issues. Why the sudden problem now?" Rushing home, I immediately called the card company. After explaining the situation, the operator shared some alarming news. "We require immediate payment of the outstanding balance, or your card will be rendered unusable." Outstanding balance? "Last month, we were able to debit your card usage from your account. Could you please verify your bank account balance?" Ending the call, I quickly logged into my bank account online. The very account that funds my card transactions, which was initially reserved for personal savings. If my memory serves me right, there should have been $8 million in there, but the balance read 0. Just before the card's due date, the entire $8 million had been withdrawn. What on earth was happening? A chilling suspicion gripped me. Could it have been Matthew? But who else had access? Our bank book and ATM card were stored together, only accessible to both of us, meaning Matthew was the only other person who could have withdrawn from my account. When he returned, I confronted him. "Hey, did you withdraw money from my account?" He smirked, let out an exasperated sigh, and replied, clearly irritated, "Oh, you figured it out, huh?" Though I did a pretty good job of covering my tracks. "I can't believe this. Why would you do that?" "For my parents, of course. I gave them your $8 million. "What did you just say?" His words hit me like a ton of bricks. He had given away my entire savings to his parents under the guise of needing financial support. Despite my shock, I managed to maintain composure as Matthew began his explanation, his voice laced with a misguided sense of pride. His parents, it turned out, had fallen prey to the lure of online shopping. Their new hobby quickly escalated into an addiction. They weren't just buying necessities. They were splurging on luxuries, accumulating duplicates of expensive items, and even distributing them to neighbors, as if hosting some extravagant giveaway. Their monthly expenditures had ballooned to a staggering $750,000, a figure well beyond Matthew's financial reach. Desperate, he had dipped into my savings, extracting a whopping $8 million to cover their excesses. When he finished, he casually remarked, "You shouldn't be upset. After all, they're practically your family too. Think of it as helping out the family. It's just $8 million. No need to make such a big deal out of it." That was the last straw. I dialed the police right then and there, my voice steady as I reported a theft. Matthew's eyes widened in disbelief as I ended the call. He erupted. "What are you doing? Did you just call the cops?" "Of course I did," I shot back. "We've just been robbed, haven't we?" He sputtered. "But this is exaggerating. It's my house too." I cut him off, standing my ground. "Actually, we're divorced now. and this apartment is leased under my name only. So technically, it's not your home anymore. We are not together. Remember those divorce papers you signed yesterday? They've been filed, so this place is mine." As the tension escalated between us, Matthew still couldn't grasp the gravity of the situation. "You've got to be kidding me. Call them back and cancel the report," he pleaded in disbelief. I waved my phone menacingly at him and warned, "If you dare lay a finger on me, I'll call the cops again. Just so you know, they're already on their way. You can't escape now. Why don't you just admit what you've done?" Looking desperate, Matthew tried to evoke our past. "Wait, hold on. We loved each other, didn't we? How did it come to this?" "Love each other?" I scoffed, my voice thick with scorn. "Don't try to feed me that nonsense. Think about it. Whose fault do you think all of this is? It all began because you blindly supported your irresponsible parents. You can't just act recklessly and expect forgiveness. Who would forgive someone as despicable as you?" Stung by my words, Matthew attempted to shift the focus. "What a fool. Do you really know who you're talking to?" "Yes, I'm talking directly to you," I shot back, my voice cold and steady. "Like parents, like children. Because you were raised by parents who were careless with money, you think it's acceptable to deplete someone else's savings. I hope the police give you a stern lecture and make you feel the weight of those $8 million. Just then, we heard the sirens approach, and the doorbell rang, a sharp sound that cut through the heated exchange. As the police entered, Matthew's bravado dissolved completely, and he crumbled, a shadow of his former self. "Who's the suspect?" an officer asked, looking between us. "It's him," I said firmly, without a doubt. "All right, let's go. You need to come in for questioning," the officer commanded. Matthew, his face pale and eyes wide with fear, stammered, "All I wanted was to support my parents." His voice trailed off into silence as the reality of the situation hit him. Matthew was led away by the police, and his protests were ignored. However, the saga didn't end there. Despite my clear statement and the evidence I provided, the authorities later informed me that the incident was considered a civil matter. They explained that the legal boundaries prevented them from taking more drastic actions in what was essentially a financial dispute within a marriage. I realized that the police were unable to provide me the resolution I was looking for, and I felt both frustrated and determined. It was obvious what to do next. I made the decision to get legal counsel in order to confront the betrayal and retrieve the sizable sum of money that had been stolen from me. Not only did I need a plan to get my assets back right away, but I also needed to make sure that this egregious betrayal of confidence and security would never occur again. I was resolute despite the emotional and legal difficulties I encountered along the way. I was ready to take on any obstacles in my path as I started my road toward financial independence and justice. I requested $10 million in damages as payment for the theft of my $8 million in savings. Naturally, Matthew's parents were unable to pay that amount. They ultimately discovered that they were deeply in debt. His parents maintained their careless spending, accruing even more debt, and ultimately turning to loan sharks for loans despite their dire financial circumstances. They always tried to remain out of sight, living in constant fear of the persistent debt collectors. I took the audacious choice to cut all contact with Matthew, in contrast to their downward trajectory. I made the finest option for my professional development and mental well-being when I moved out and into a new apartment. Luckily, my career took off without warning, and I soon made more money than I could have imagined. Ever since I broke up with Matthew, everything in my career seemed to be falling into place. I now regret not getting a divorce from him sooner. My marriage's breakdown taught me a profound yet important lesson. It showed me that I still had a lot of life left in me, and that I could bounce back and start fresh. I learned a lot from this turbulent experience, and decided to be more cautious going forward to make sure that my mental and financial health was never jeopardized. Despite its many difficulties, this time in my life served as a reminder of the value of independence and the power that comes from choosing to move past challenging circumstances. Please take action. In desperation, I called out, but my husband and mother-in-law turned a blind eye. I stood there covered in blood, and they didn't even bother to look at me. It looked like they were more concerned about whether the floor was unclean and about the dangerous dog that had bitten me. I had no choice but to call for an ambulance on my own, and I was transported away by myself. During the ambulance trip to the hospital, I could not stop crying. Eventually, my spouse gave me a call. In a panic, he was shouting, "Hey, turn the ambulance around. Brenda Andrews is my name, and I am 37 years old. A friend took me to a mixer, a social event for civil servants, 5 years ago. Brenda, you're coming, right?" she demanded. My husband Scott, who is 5 years younger than me, and I met there. My mother teaches physical education, and my dad instructs judo. My 2 older brothers, who are all black belts in judo, came from a household that was quite athletic. It turned me into a little tomboy. Conversely, Scott was an entirely different person. His shirt buttons didn't match when we first met, and he stammered when making the toast. Though he didn't seem to be a nasty person, he was a decent guy who just didn't seem to be able to get things quite right. This kind side of Scott appealed to me and made me feel compassionate. I actually suggested that we start dating after we went on a few dates. Scott had a knack for reducing my innately irritable mood. Before I knew it, I had come to believe that I should stay with him forever. I proposed to him on our first anniversary together. I proposed marriage, saying that I would take care of you for the rest of your life. "That's supposed to be my line, Brenda," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm grateful for everything you've done. Let's keep looking out for one another." That's how we made the decision to tie the knot. Scott was really anxious around my 2 brothers and my severe father when he first met my folks. "You know there's no need to be scared," my mother attempted to reassure him. However, Scott loudly answered, "Yes." The whole family laughed when he broke into a cracking voice. "Even though he was severe," my father commented, "I can tell he put a lot of thought into the gifts he brought, but he seems a bit unsure of himself. I'm glad he loves Brenda so much because it's obvious." It was time to meet Scott's family after getting to know my own. He informed me that 3 years prior, his father had died of cancer. Scott was their 6th child after 6 years of trying due to his parents' struggles with infertility. I wasn't the anxious sort normally, but on that particular day, I was particularly nervous about seeing his mother. I was so worried about what would happen if she didn't like me. What if I welcome her incorrectly? What happens if our age gap bothers her? At that moment, Scott, who isn't the most comforting person, said, "Don't worry. My mom is really kind. Talking to her will come naturally to you. She is well known in the community for her constant smiles." It helped me a little to hear this. "And there's no way anyone could dislike you, Brenda," he continued. His remarks cheered me up. We rang the doorbell as soon as we got to his family's house. I made an introduction. "Brenda, nice to meet you." "Oh, you must be Brenda. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today," his mother remarked with a warm grin. Come on in. There's no need to be so formal. She looked elegant and kind, and she was wearing a beautiful dress. When the topic of the age gap came up, she responded, "Age doesn't matter at all," which alarmed me. That someone like you will become Scott's wife makes me very happy. My worries all vanished. She was excited by everything I stated and showed no concern at all about my age difference. I had a blast. We got to talking about a dog my mother-in-law used to own. "Isn't that adorable?" she said, pointing to a picture. "This dog belonged to me in elementary school. The dog was quite intelligent and amiable, but as it grew older, it went away." My spouse then said, "Mom, Brenda doesn't really like dogs." "Brenda, you don't like dogs?" she asked, appearing astonished. I said, "Yeah, in actuality, despite my slight tomboyish tendencies, I'm terrified of dogs. When I went to collect the ball from my brother when I was playing in the park as a child, a frightened stray dog bit my arm. My bleeding was severe, requiring 5 sutures. I've been terrified of dogs ever then, and it was a horrible event." In reply, Shirley said, "Oh my, that was unknown to me. I apologize profusely for bringing up dogs when you're terrified of them." Quickly, I replied, No, I apologize if I alarmed you. The poodle in the photo was quite adorable." "Thank you," Shirley answered with a smile. "Your mother is such a wonderful person, so beautiful and kind," I told Scott on the drive home. With a smile, he answered, "I know, right? My mother has a kind disposition and is constantly grinning." I concurred, stating, "She's a beautiful mother." We talked eagerly about his mother all the time. Then suddenly, my husband became serious. "Actually, there's something I want to talk to you about," he said. "You know how we visited my family home today?" "Yes, it was such a big house. I was really surprised," I replied. "Exactly," he continued. "When my dad was still alive, he designed it with my mom in mind, making sure everything was convenient for her. The house even has 4 children's rooms in case they had more kids, but since I'm an only child, they were never used. Now my mom is living there alone, and she finds it too big and lonely. So I was thinking, what if we live with her?" I was shocked by his unexpected idea. My eyes widened in surprise. It's true the house was really big, and my mother-in-law kept it spotless. Living in such a house would be amazing, but we're newlyweds, and it feels a bit too soon for that. After thinking for a moment, I said, "Your mother is a wonderful person, and the house is so beautiful, but it feels like too much for me. We just got married, right? I'd like to enjoy our newlywed life, just the 2 of us, for a little while longer." "I see. You're right. I understand," he said. "I'll let my mom know." "Yes, I'm sorry. Please explain it to her gently." I felt a bit guilty toward Shirley, but I knew it was important to share my true feelings instead of just going along with everything. I was relieved that my husband seemed to understand and agree with me. Then our married life together began. Scott was still a bit clumsy, but he actively helped with house chores, and we were enjoying a happy and smooth life. However, recently, something has been bothering me a little. "Oh, hello, Mom." "Ah, got it. I'm coming over now," Scott said on the phone. "Your mom again?" I asked. "Yeah, the living room light bulb burned out. I'll go over and replace it." And off he went to his mom's house. Lately, it's been like this all the time. Mom bought a new computer, but she's having trouble setting it up, so I'm heading over to help. Or Mom bought too many groceries at the supermarket, so she asked me to come pick her up. I'm going to help her out. Whether it was weekdays or weekends, the phone would ring, and Scott would head back to his mom's house more and more often. I started feeling a little upset, thinking that he could at least spend the weekends at home with me. But at the same time, I reminded myself that Scott is just a kind and thoughtful person who cares a lot about his mother. A month had passed since we got married, and just like when we were dating, we hadn't had any major arguments, and things were going smoothly. Today was Shirley's birthday. My husband and I had picked out a present and a cake for her, and we went to his parents' house. As soon as we walked in, a scary dog suddenly jumped out. "What?" I said, my eyes widening in surprise. There hadn't been a dog when we came for the wedding visit. Since I'm afraid of dogs, I quickly hid behind my husband. Shirley came out of the living room and said, "Oh, welcome." "Mom, where did this scary dog come from?" Scott asked. "Well, I was feeling lonely living by myself, so I got a dog recently. Isn't it cute?" she said, smiling. The dog was small, a Welsh corgi. "I see," I replied, still startled by the dog's sudden appearance. I forced a smile, even though I was scared. Without noticing my discomfort, Shirley brought the dog closer to me and said, "Come on, Brenda. Why don't you hold it?" I took a step back and said, I mentioned this when we came for the wedding visit, but I was bitten by a dog when I was younger, and I've been afraid of dogs ever since." I politely declined to hold the dog. "Oh, did you say that?" "I didn't know," she said, pretending not to remember. "But it's so cute. What a strange person you are." I noticed a slight smirk on her face, and for the first time, I wondered if Shirley was being sarcastic. After that day, whenever Scott said, "Mom wants to see you," or "Let's go visit my mom," I started declining. I still couldn't forget the smirk she gave me when she saw I was uncomfortable around the dog. A month later, after finishing work and coming home, I found my mother-in-law in the house. "What? Why are you here?" I asked, surprised. "Oh, welcome home," she greeted me cheerfully, as if everything was normal. She was in the kitchen, had opened the fridge, and was cooking. "Why did you come over so suddenly?" I asked. "My dear, Scott said he wanted to eat my homemade stew, so I just had to come," she said, looking very happy as she hummed to herself. "Oh, I see." I tried to smile, but I felt tense, especially since her dog was in the living room. To make things worse, she had fed the dog, and it was looking clean on my favorite antique plate. I had bought that plate at a flea market in Canada, and now the dog was looking at it. Who could possibly be okay with this? I went to my room to put away my bags and coat. I told myself not to get upset since Shirley had come all this way. I took a deep breath to calm down and went back to the living room. To my horror, the dog had made a mess on the brand new carpet. The stain was bright yellow. "Oh no, the dog messed up the carpet," I shouted in a panic, but Shirley didn't seem to care. "Oh dear, it made a mess right there, huh?" she said casually, not even bothering to scold the dog or clean it up. Knowing the stain would get worse if I didn't take care of it, I ended up cleaning it myself. I was usually calm, but this really frustrated me. Just then, I heard the door open and my husband came home. The dog, hearing him, started barking loudly. "Woof! Woof!" It barked until he came into the living room, and even the sound of the barking scared me. Once the dog saw it was my husband, it stopped, and I felt a bit of relief. The three of us sat down to eat the stew Shirley had made. Neither my husband nor Shirley bothered to put the dog in its cage, so it wandered around our feet, hoping for food. I felt tense and started trembling. Shirley noticed and said, "You really don't like dogs, do you, Brenda? You look so scared." "I brought the dog today to help you get over your fear." Bringing the dog here without asking, using my favorite plate, letting it mess up the carpet, and having it bark at me. How is any of this supposed to help me get over my fear? If anything, it made me hate dogs even more. In my mind, I was screaming, if you really want to help, just put the dog in a cage or keep it away from me. But my husband didn't notice my discomfort at all. "Mom is so kind. She's really trying to help you, Brenda," he said. I couldn't believe it. How was this kind? She was pretending to care while actually making things worse for me. Then, to make things worse, my husband started to lecture me. "Brenda, this isn't okay." "What? I'm the one at fault?" I asked, shocked. "Mom has done all this for you, and yet you keep avoiding the dog. You won't even visit my parents' house because of the dog. You're not trying hard enough, Brenda," my husband said. Since his mother was there, he started criticizing me more harshly than usual. I had no choice but to say, "I'm sorry," and apologize in front of my mother-in-law. I bit my lip, trying to hold back my frustration. After that, Shirley began coming to our house often, always bringing her dog. Each time, the dog would run around the house making a mess. But Shirley never seemed to care or discipline the dog. These visits were stressing me out more and more. One day, I had enough. I gathered my courage and said, "Please, I've told you many times that I'm afraid of dogs. Can you stop bringing the dog here?" Shirley's face changed, and she suddenly looked angry. "I've been wondering," she snapped. "Are you using your fear of dogs as an excuse to avoid me? Brenda, that's terrible." I was shocked and had no idea what she meant. But what surprised me even more was that my husband agreed with her. "Brenda, that's too much. My mom has been thinking of you, and you've been avoiding her. That's really rude. Apologize to her, Scott. Shirley, you both know I'm afraid of dogs, right? But you keep bringing the dog, and every time it makes a mess, I'm the one who has to clean it up. This is too much," I said, frustrated. Shirley frowned and said, "At least let me enjoy my time with the dog. You're too old to have kids anyway, so what's the harm?" I was stunned. "Is that what you really think?" I asked. "Isn't it true you're already 37, and it's getting harder to have a baby at your age? But my son is only 32. He has his whole future ahead of him. Now he's stuck with an older, arrogant wife," she muttered. This was the same woman who once told me age didn't matter. Hearing her true feelings shocked me. I couldn't bear to have her around any longer. So I said, "Please don't come here again." My eyes filled with tears. And maybe because of that, Shirley got even more upset. "How dare you? You really are an arrogant wife," she shouted before storming out with her dog. From that day on, I started feeling more and more resentment toward both my husband and Shirley. Ever since my husband defended her and blamed me, things between us had been tense, and we barely spoke to each other anymore. 2 weekends later, my husband came to me with a serious look on his face. "Brenda, I'm sorry," he began. "I was wrong to. I should have thought more about your feelings," Scott said. I felt relieved, thinking he finally understood how I felt. But then he added, "Let's go apologize to Mom now." "What? Why should we do that? Was I wrong that day?" I asked, confused. "It's not about being right or wrong. Don't make Mom angry," Just apologize, please, he said. In the end, my husband didn't understand anything. He didn't care about my feelings at all. He took me to his parents' house against my will. When we got there, Shirley was waiting for me, hands on her hips. Shirley, I'm sorry about the other day, I said as my husband had told me to, just to calm her down. But then she said, I'll forgive you if you hold the dog. That was it. I realized I couldn't reason with her. I had apologized even though I wasn't wrong, and I had tried to meet her halfway many times. And this was her response. As I've said before, I can't do that, I replied firmly, keeping my cool. Shirley got angry and forcefully pushed the dog toward me. Ah! I cried out and instinctively pushed the dog away. But my scream startled the dog, and it bit my hand. It hurt so much, and my hand was quickly covered in blood. Please do something, I begged my husband and Shirley, but Shirley just said, well, anyone would be scared by such a loud noise. Poor thing, focusing only on the dog. To my shock, my husband was more concerned about whether the floor was dirty. Neither of them cared about me, and I felt disgusted. Meanwhile, my hand kept bleeding, and I had to shoo the dog away myself. I decided to call an ambulance. When the ambulance arrived, Shirley scoffed, Oh, come on, you're being so dramatic over a dog bite, looking at me with a mocking expression. My husband, even as the ambulance showed up, didn't change. He was still checking the floor. Ignoring both of them, I got into the ambulance, pressing my bleeding hand. I was filled with anger, pain, and sadness. I couldn't stop crying as I sat alone in the ambulance. For some reason, my husband called me while I was being taken to the hospital. I thought maybe he was finally worried about me, so I answered the phone. But instead, he said, Mom got bitten by the dog. You're still nearby, right? Tell the driver to come back to our house. Hearing those words, I felt my feelings for my husband start to disappear. I didn't care anymore what happened to him or his mother. Let them deal with it on their own. I quietly hung up the phone. When I got to the hospital and the doctor checked my wound, he said it was deeper than expected, and I would need to stay in the hospital. Since I wasn't ready for this, I called my parents and asked them to bring some things for me. After a while, my parents arrived. Brenda, are you okay? They asked, their faces full of worry as they looked at me lying in bed. I'm sorry for making you worry. It still hurts a little, but I'm okay for now, I replied. I see. When we heard you were taken to the hospital, we were really worried. What happened? They asked. I told them everything about how my mother-in-law and husband had acted. My mom hugged me and said, You did well. I had been feeling so alone, but just being able to talk to them made me feel better. However, my dad was furious after hearing the story. I will never forgive them, he said angrily. He looked like he was about to explode with rage. The next day, my husband called. Scott was also furious. What the hell is going on? The police just showed up at our house, and now my mom is being questioned. I don't know. Maybe the hospital reported it. They asked me how I got hurt, so I told them it was your mom's dog that bit me. What? What if my mom gets arrested? This is your fault for being careless in the first place. Yeah, I figured you'd blame me, I said, but I don't care anymore. Actually, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. Let's get a divorce. What? We've only been married for 4 months. Getting divorced so soon. Everyone at work and our family will laugh at us. It's embarrassing. I'm not divorcing you, he said angrily and hung up the phone. 2 weeks later, I was discharged from the hospital. My parents came to pick me up, and I decided to go back to their house with them. After that, I talked to a lawyer about the divorce and asking for alimony from my husband, since there was no way to reason with him. Even though my husband kept calling me, I ignored all his calls. Eventually, after missing another call, I got a text message from him saying, "I'm at the cafe near your parents' house. You better come." If he really wanted to talk, he could have come to the house, but he didn't. It was clear he didn't want to face my parents. With no other choice, I went to the cafe. The first thing my husband said was, "I'm not getting a divorce. I don't care what you want. I am getting a divorce. There's no way I want to stay with you or your mother after everything that's happened," I replied. "Don't disparage my mother. You are to blame for this." He went on to lecture me. "You avoided my mom because you said you were afraid of dogs, and the dog bit you because you screamed." At that moment, my dad and his 2 brothers showed up at the diner. My father had called my brothers to come along after I told him about my husband's message before we left. With 3 bulky judo practitioners encircling him, Scott's voice faltered as he uttered, "Oh, father-in-law, brothers-in-law." He cowered in a way that was almost comical. My dad interrupted, saying, "How dare you harm my daughter? Our sister desires a separation. Are you planning to present it to her?" They all fixed fierce looks on him. Scott stammered in fear and said, Yes." It took a lot of prodding from my father and brothers for him to finally consent to the divorce and pay alimony. "Sign these," I said, passing him the divorce documents I had already prepared. "We are divorcing each other." My spouse reluctantly signed the documents, and I departed from the cafe. I was able to divorce my spouse and get alimony from him with the help of my father and brothers. In addition to obtaining alimony from my ex-mother-in-law, my attorney also sought payment from her for my injuries. I then learned that the police had questioned my ex-mother-in-law regarding the dog bite. She had to give up the dog after receiving a severe warning. It seems that she lavished so much attention on the dog that it began to believe it was more powerful than people. It bit her also after it bit me, and that's how she fractured her wrist. Now that her wrist movement is restricted, she lives an uncomfortable life. My ex-husband and his mother returned to live with their parents. She would ask Scott, "Can you help with the laundry?" because she was unable to use her wrist correctly. "Could you prepare food for me?" However, Scott was unable to accomplish much on his own because he had never cleaned a house before. My ex-husband blamed her, stating, "It's your fault this happened in the first place," which led to their frequent arguments. They started having frequent arguments. Meanwhile, stories about his mistreatment of me led to his divorce. According to his family and co-workers, his pride took a hit, and it was for the best. While I was in the hospital, I was the one who began those rumors. I told his co-worker the story, and I had his contact information. I told this co-worker on purpose since I knew they loved to gossip. It operated flawlessly. My co-worker disseminated information about my ex-husband's actions, branding him as a mama's boy, abusive, and divorced. In all honesty, he deserved it because it made him an easy target at work. I have a great life now that my brothers and parents have supported me. How is this story to you? I'm Luna, a 33-year-old mother of 2 amazing kids who stays at home. We've been having a nice time lately, although we went through a difficult period because of certain problems with my spouse, most of which had to do with his mother. You see, my spouse and his mother are quite close. He's a mama's boy, if you will, and occasionally, it seems like she's too involved in our life. We just had a serious conversation during which the problem came to a head. My spouse pulled me over and requested a seat so they could talk about our finances. That's when it all began. He told me that everything at work was good, but that we would have to cut back on our spending at home to cover this new expense. He hesitated and inhaled deeply before answering my question about the cost and saying he wants to start sending his mother a certain amount of money every month. He felt that although it wouldn't be much, she would need the additional help because she was becoming older. I found this puzzling since Catherine, his mother, owned a prosperous company. She was a widow, and since her kids were grown and out of the house, I didn't think she needed financial assistance. I voiced my worries, but he dismissed them, refusing to say how much he intended to send her. I pushed for specifics, demanding openness, especially because I handled our family's finances. At last, he told her that he would be sending her between $6,000 and $100 a month. It was shocking how much. It seemed extravagant to pay $6,100 a month, especially because that's about what many families spend monthly overall. He was resolute despite my argument that it wasn't reasonable. We were so unhappy and unable to come to an agreement that night that we slept in different beds. The argument had gotten that bad. This financial choice had an impact on our relationship as well as our budget. Sending $6,100 a month to someone who didn't have an urgent need appeared unfeasible to someone who values prudent money management. That amount, which comes to $63,500 a year, might go a long way toward helping our family save more money, pay for our health insurance, or support our children's college education. Alternatively, if this sum was contributed to a good cause, it might really help individuals who are in need. I tried explaining all of this to my spouse, but he wouldn't listen. He even recommended that I manage the monthly transactions 6 months after he began sending money to his mother. This felt like an even stronger declaration of his priorities, putting his mother's whims ahead of our family's financial security. But 5 months into the allowance, this arrangement took a surprising turn when I learned more details about the circumstances. My mother-in-law remarked in passing how this financial assistance had arrived at a critical moment during a visit. Though she hadn't wanted to seek for assistance, business hadn't been great, and my husband had stepped in to support her out of the blue. Upon hearing her acknowledge her financial struggles, my viewpoint shifted. Her vulnerability touched me, and I began to understand her yearning. It made sense to help someone who was truly in need. However, as our chat progressed, it took an odd turn. Catherine started talking about possible opulent getaways she could now afford because of the additional funds. I thought this was strange. Should she really require financial assistance, why take into account such exorbitant costs? She would swiftly modify her story whenever I appeared perplexed by her intentions, insisting that she only meant for these trips to be possible until she was financially independent again. Although this contradiction seemed puzzling, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt and assumed that she was just having a brief episode of wishful thinking. I kept sending her the money for the next 3 months, and each time I got a sincere thank you that seemed to validate her actual need. Our family life was soon negatively impacted by the financial burden of the situation, as I felt bad for questioning my mother-in-law and disagreeing with my husband. The decrease in our disposable income was apparent, despite our best attempts to make adjustments and make savings. So I started trying to handle our money more carefully. Then one evening, while tidying up my husband's office, curiosity led me to a text message on his phone from his mother. It read, "Hey Liam, hope you're doing well. Could you increase my monthly allowance? I want to enjoy some extra luxuries. I was taken aback. Given that she already received a substantial sum that many would find ample for basic needs, her request for more, specifically for luxuries, seemed excessive considering she was a healthy 62-year-old widow who lived alone. This request raised doubts about her claimed financial distress. Driven by a mix of concern and suspicion, I resisted the urge to delve deeper into my husband's emails and instead turned my attention to our family's financial records. Finding no clues there, I decided to approach the matter directly. I phoned Catherine late one evening. "Hello, Catherine. I hope everything's okay with you." She responded, "Well, I'm managing, but honestly, it's been tough. Sometimes I struggle to afford even basic things like toiletries. I'm really grateful to my son for helping me out." Seizing the opportunity, I invited her over for tea the following day, suggesting a casual get-together to perhaps learn more about her situation firsthand. "Tea sounds wonderful. Thank you for inviting me. You know, things have been tight for me too. Sometimes I can't even afford tea, so it would be nice to have some with you." "Oh, it'll be my pleasure, Catherine. Just come over, and we'll have a nice afternoon together." I set my plan into motion. The next day, we sat down for tea, enjoying light conversation. When Catherine excused herself to use the bathroom, I saw my chance to uncover more about her financial reality. I found her phone in her purse, unlocked it, and opened her banking app. Women's intuition pushed me forward, feeling both the weight and the risk of what I was about to discover about her true financial standing. As my suspicions about Catherine's financial situation grew, I decided to delve deeper into her records. What I found was completely unexpected and left me reeling. Catherine, who I thought was struggling financially, actually had a staggering $2.1 million in her bank account, a discovery that I had to double-check to believe. The reality of her wealth was undeniable as I refreshed her banking app and saw the same huge sum staring back at me. My confusion only intensified when I stumbled upon a text message on her phone from one of her employees. The message read, "Hello, Catherine. Please find attached the financial breakdown of last month's earnings. Just wanted to let you know, it looks like we've made a big profit for the 5th month in a row. You're a fantastic businesswoman. I'm eager to hear your thoughts." Driven by a mix of disbelief and curiosity, I opened the attached document and was confronted with even more astonishing figures. A monthly profit of $10,200 for a small business. This was no small feat. Sitting there, absorbing the shock of what I discovered, a wave of anger washed over me. Catherine had been extracting money from her son and indirectly from her grandchildren under the guise of need, which now appeared to be nothing more than manipulation to boost her already substantial wealth. As I heard Catherine's foodie, hastily cleared all evidence of my snooping and returned her phone to her purse, my heart racing. When Catherine returned, she thanked me warmly for the tea, continuing to play the part of a financially burdened elderly woman. "Oh, Luna, thank you again for the lovely tea. You know, as an old lady, it's tough to manage, especially when you're already struggling. Lately, things have been really hard for me, dear." Her words, now so clearly disconnected from her financial reality, echoed hollowly as I nodded, hiding my turmoil behind a polite smile. The discrepancy between her portrayed hardships and her actual prosperity left me grappling with what to do next. Catherine expressed her gratitude for the support my husband and I had been providing, and with a polite smile, she ventured to ask if it might be possible to increase her monthly assistance to $8,000. It took every bit of composure I had to maintain a calm demeanor in response to her request, given the discoveries I had made about her actual financial situation. I understand that times seem tough for you, and we want to help, I managed to say, keeping my voice even. It's not as if you have millions tucked away. Her brief pause at my words nearly went unnoticed, but I was too attuned to her reactions now. She quickly covered her surprise, laughing it off. Oh no, of course not. If I were that wealthy, I wouldn't be asking for more help, darling. So, what do you say? Regrettably, I had to let her down gently. Unfortunately, we can't manage an extra $1,900 right now. The change in Catherine's expression was immediate. Her smile vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped look of frustration. That's all right. No problem, she said briskly, her tone slightly colder. I have to leave now, but let's catch up again soon. She left in a hurry, almost as if embarrassed by a personal rejection, with the knowledge of her deceit fresh in my mind. Any remnants of sympathy I had for her evaporated. I faced a dilemma about whether to reveal what I had discovered to my husband. After some thought, I decided it was important for him to see his mother's true character on his own, especially given his past criticisms of my concerns. It was a tough lesson, but one he needed to learn by himself. A few days later, the time came to send Catherine her usual $6,100 allowance. Despite having the money ready, I hesitated. Given what I knew, I opted not to send it immediately. I wanted her to experience the surprise and perhaps a bit of the hardship she had so falsely claimed to endure. This decision wasn't made lightly, but it felt necessary to underline the severity of the situation and to prompt a more genuine conversation in the future. When the money didn't arrive as expected, it was the wake-up call Catherine truly needed. As predicted, my husband called me a few hours later, visibly upset. "What's going on?" he demanded. "What do you mean?" I replied, trying to keep calm. "Don't play dumb, Luna. I know what you're up to. Why haven't you sent Mom the allowance? I'm getting tired of your games." He'd accused. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Listen, I understand you care about your mom, and I'm sorry if it seems like I don't appreciate that, but you need to hear me out. There's a reason behind what I'm doing." He cut me off, his tone harsh and dismissive. "You don't even earn a dime to have a say in how we spend our money. It's my money, and I'll decide what to do with it. So when I say send money, you do it. You're just a housewife. Remember that." His words were like a knife through my heart. How could he speak to me that way? All the frustration and anger I had contained for so long suddenly erupted, and I couldn't hold back any longer. "You know what your problem is. You don't appreciate me. Do you think being a housewife and mom is a breeze? Well, let's see how easy it is without me. I'm not sticking around to be treated like this, but before I go, check your mother's bank account. Don't bother calling me until you've done that. Have a nice evening." "Luna, wait, I didn't mean," he started to say, but I had already hung up. I was done being treated like I didn't matter. Sometimes life throws challenges at us that force us to take a stand. I had been working tirelessly, and all my efforts were taken for granted. Let's see how he manages without me, especially when he discovers the truth about his mother's deceit. Driven by a mixture of defiance and the need for vindication, I sent him the photos I had taken of his mother's bank account details during my investigation. It was time he saw the full picture and understood the extent of the situation. I switched my phone to Do Not Disturb mode, gathered some essentials, and packed bags for myself and the kids. We checked into a nearby hotel, A move I explained away to the children by saying our house needed fumigation and it would be a short stay. To keep their worries at bay, I reassured them that Daddy was staying at a different hotel for the time being. I wanted to protect them from the harsh realities and the tension at home. They didn't need to bear the weight of adult problems. Despite setting my phone to ignore incoming calls and messages, notifications from my mother-in-law and my husband began to fill my inbox. I was too emotionally exhausted to confront them, so I focused on making the evening enjoyable and relaxing for my children. We played games and spent quality time together, a much-needed distraction for all of us. The next morning, I was awakened by a call from the hotel's front desk. "Hello, miss. There's someone named Liam here who'd like to meet you. For safety reasons, we need to confirm if you know each other." "Yes, I know him. He's my husband," I responded, letting them know they could give him my room number. When Liam arrived, he immediately embraced me, his hug full of regret and desperation. "Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry for everything. I saw the evidence you sent me, and you were right not to give her any more money," he said, tears streaming down his face as he clung to me. I led him into the room, and as he composed himself, we sat down to talk. "Darling, I'm so sorry for everything. I'm glad you realized what was going on. Can you tell me what happened?" he asked, genuinely remorseful. Just then my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. I hesitated but decided to answer. "Hello? How dare you invade my privacy like that? I could sue, you know. Do you even need the money? How dare you try to ruin my reputation in front of my son?" she accused furiously. Her words confirmed her disregard for the strain she was putting on our family. Despite her anger, I remained calm, aware that Liam needed to see this side of her for himself. Her manipulation had to be laid bare, not just for my sake, but for the well-being of our entire family. As my mother-in-law's voice crackled through the phone, her words were laced with malice, not resembling the woman I once knew, but more like a vindictive stranger. "Ha! You must be delusional if you think he'll stop sending me money. Do you think he'll listen to a mere housewife? You're sorely mistaken. Yes, I have money. I've always had money since my husband passed away. I just like to control Liam. Sometimes so he doesn't get too arrogant. He needs to remember that mommy comes first." Her harsh words turned my blood cold, and her tone, manipulative and bitter, shocked me deeply. The yelling was loud enough to wake the children, adding chaos to the already tense atmosphere. Unfazed by the impact of her actions, she continued, "So you're not bothered by how your selfishness has disrupted this household. You don't care that Liam and I have been arguing because of your actions. You don't even care that you've been stealing from your son and grandchildren." Her response was chilling. "Oh, come on. You two are headed for divorce anyway. I can't wait for that. They'll come home to me eventually. And as for those kids, well, I guess I don't really care." "Mom, that's incredibly cruel," I said, hoping Liam was listening. Liam, who had been quiet, finally spoke, his voice filled with disbelief and hurt. "Liam, honey, listen. I didn't mean." "Nope, that won't work on me this time," he replied firmly. "I've seen your true colors, and I've had enough. You've made the past few months hell for me and Luna. How could you manipulate me like this? I'm your son. What kind of evil has possessed you to do such terrible things?" His voice carried the betrayal and sadness that he had missed the warning flags. "My amazing wife Luna saw right through you from the beginning, even though I fell for your tricks. She was aware that something wasn't right. Yet I insulted and yelled at her. Not any longer. My true family is Luna, not you. I hope to never hear from you again. Liam, hold on. However, I am alone, she begged feebly. He said, maybe that's how it should be, and then put a stop to the call with a decisive click, ending a trying chapter and possibly paving the way for a fresh start for us. Though he appeared distraught, as Liam took in the information, I could see a distinct sense of relief flood over him. The understanding that he had been manipulated his entire life must have felt like a huge weight being lifted off his shoulders. He spent the remainder of the day expressing his sincere regret to me and our kids for his actions and the emotional separation he had placed between us. He admitted how much he'd taken for granted, saying he couldn't even get through one night without us. Liam sincerely apologized for his previous transgressions and vowed to do better. Now that he knew the dynamics of manipulation that had distorted his judgment for so long, he was resolved not to let history repeat itself. He was adamant about his bond with his mother. He meant it when he claimed he didn't want to hear from her ever again. She tried to contact Liam several times, but he kept turning her down. Now that she had made her decision, she was on her own to deal with the fallout. His dedication to prioritizing our family ushered in a new era for us, one that was full of promise for a future where we would be closer. Steps closer, I realized I needed to tell her what I had found. My name is Lily, and I recently turned 15 years old. Since then, everything has changed. Allow me to introduce you to my family. From the outside, our family appeared to be typical. Mom stayed at home, and Dad put in a lot of overtime. Olivia, my younger sister, was 8 years my junior. Dad worked as a manager for a large corporation that was actually owned by my mother's grandparents. Grandma had a lot of ambition. She began by operating a few laundromats, then expanded the company by producing cleaning supplies and laundry detergents. She offered Mom the business when she chose to retire, but Mom rejected her offer, so Dad took over. That's when the complicated part began. I recall the day when everything broke apart. I heard my mom yelling at Dad downstairs as I was trying to concentrate on my homework in my room. Frank, you're nothing more than a loser. This is the home and business of my family. I should be grateful for letting you take over. In the weeks that followed, things worsened. When Mom and Dad did talk, it was always followed by an argument. They didn't talk much. Olivia was 7 years old when I tried to keep her occupied, but she sensed something wasn't right. Then the day arrived that would alter everything. Dad was standing in the living room with a bag at his feet when I got home from school. Dad, I murmured, my voice wavering. What's happening? He approached me and gave me a firm embrace. He apologized. Sweetheart, I have to leave this place. It is detrimental to everyone. I experienced difficulty breathing. However, what about Olivia? How about me? I inquired. With tears in his eyes, he withdrew. I adore you two a great deal. Remember that always. But love isn't enough sometimes. He gave me a forehead kiss before turning to face Olivia, whose big, bewildered eyes were observing. Pumpkin, please be good for your big sister. And he was gone in an instant. The door shut behind him, and I felt empty within. An hour later, Mom arrived home. She didn't appear startled when I told her that her father had departed. She simply nodded as though she knew what was coming. Well done, she mumbled. Mum, I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. You can't really say that? Her icy gaze moved to face me. Lily, your father repeatedly cheated on me. I was at my breaking point. Everything changed forever that night. I could hear Mom talking on the phone in her room as I laid in bed. She sounded happier than she had in months, and she was laughing. I was too exhausted to care, but I wondered who she was speaking to. After Dad left, just when I thought things couldn't be any more confusing, Mom gave us another surprise. We were eating breakfast when she said, "I have some news. One morning, I am getting hitched." My cereal nearly caused me to choke. "How come?" "Dad has just been gone for 3 months, Mom." As if it were no great issue, she waved her hand. "Lily, sometimes real love comes as an unexpected surprise. When you're older, you'll comprehend." Paul moved in 2 weeks later. I suppose he was all right. He was tall and attractive to the point where people would remark, "Oh, he seems nice." But I wasn't comfortable with him immediately away for some reason. With Olivia, Dad tried to be there by playing games and assisting with her homework. But with me, it was as if I didn't exist. In the meantime, the company was also going through changes. Mom took over after Dad departed, and she brought Paul to work with her. They appeared to get along well, as they were constantly discussing business ideas. I tried to put my attention on my own life, friends, school, and all the typical teenage things, but I couldn't get rid of the sensation that I was losing my identity in my own family. When Mom and Paul said they were launching a new company branch in a different city, things became worse. Mom announced, "We're moving," one evening. "It's a fantastic opportunity for the company. Paul and I have been talking, and we think it's best if you stay here," she said. I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. "Remain here by yourself?" Startled, I inquired. Mom said, "You're almost done with school, and there won't be much space in the new house. Making the transfer just before your examinations would be absurd." It was akin to taking a hit to the gut. "So, where should I reside now? In the street?" Trying not to cry, I asked. Mom reprimanded, "Don't be dramatic, Lily. Your granny will host you. She has already given her consent." I hurriedly made my way to my room and shut the door. Tears of hurt and rage streamed down my cheeks as I laid on my bed. I kept asking myself, when did I start to burden my own mother so much? The ensuing weeks passed quickly, occupied with moving boxes and saying goodbyes. But not to me. Olivia shed tears because she didn't want to part from her friends. I tried to be happy for Olivia's sake as I assisted her with packing. She said, "Will you come visit us, Laura?" With tears welling up in her large brown eyes, I gave her a strong hug. "I will, of course, Squirt. I'm not so easy to get rid of." Grandma and I watched the moving van pull away from the porch the day they went. Paul nodded awkwardly, and Mom gave me a short hug. After that, they left, dragging Olivia along. Being Grandma's resident wasn't as horrible as I had thought. In her own way, she was quite cool. She gave me space when I needed it, and was always there to listen when I wanted to talk or just have a cup of tea. It didn't feel like home, even though my 20th birthday came faster than I expected. That morning, I woke up feeling strange. I should have been excited, but all I felt was empty. Mom called, of course. "Happy birthday, sweetie," she said, sounding overly cheerful. "I'm sorry we can't be there. Work is just crazy right now. We'll celebrate next month when we visit, okay?" I knew we wouldn't. They hadn't visited once since they moved. "Sure, Mom. Sounds great." Grandma must have sensed how I was feeling, because she really went all out. She let me invite a few friends over, ordered my favorite food, and even baked a cake herself. For a few hours, I almost forgot about everything. The next morning, Grandma called me into her office. She had a serious look on her face that made my stomach drop. "Sit down, Lily," she said, pointing to the chair across from her desk. "We need to talk." My mind raced. Oh no, is she kicking me out? Where would I go? But then she smiled, reached into her desk drawer, and pulled out a small folder. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Open it." I did, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw what was inside. "Grandma, is this?" She nodded, her eyes sparkling. "The company is yours now, Lily. I see potential in you. You've got a good head on your shoulders, and I know you'll do right by the business. But Mom and Paul, they're running it now," I said, still in disbelief. Grandma's face tightened a little. "They're running a branch. The main company, the heart of it all. That's yours now." I sat there stunned. Me, barely 20, the owner of a multi-million-dollar company? It felt like a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I don't know what to say. I finally managed. Grandma reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll give it your all." I nodded, still in shock. "I will. I promise." She leaned back satisfied. "Good. Now I have one more piece of advice for you, and I want you to listen carefully." I leaned in, hanging on to every word. Grandma said, "Call your father. There's more to the story than you know. Talk to him, even if it's just as a consultant, but hear him out." It took me a whole week to find the courage to call Dad. We decided to meet at a small cafe downtown. When I saw him, my heart tightened. He looked older, tired, but his eyes brightened when he saw me. There was an awkward silence at first, but then everything spilled out. The divorce, Mom's remarriage, the move, and Grandma's gift. Dad listened quietly, his face showing all kinds of emotions. When I finished, he took a deep breath. "Lily, there's something you need to know about the divorce." Then he told me everything. How Mom never respected him, always putting him down and calling him a loser, making him feel worthless. He explained how after a huge fight, he got drunk and made the biggest mistake of his life. "I cheated on her," he admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "I regretted it right away, but your mother used it against me. She threatened to take everything, even you and Olivia. She wanted me to leave, give her all the property, and pay alimony." I sat there shocked. This didn't sound like the Mom I thought I knew. "Why didn't you fight it?" I asked. Dad looked at me with sadness and love in his eyes. "Because of you and Olivia. I didn't want you both to go through a messy public divorce. I thought this would be easier." As we talked, it felt like a huge weight was lifted off my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my dad back. Before we left, I took a deep breath and asked Dad, "How would you feel about helping me with the company as a consultant?" His smile was all the answer I needed. The next few months were a whirlwind. I studied for exams, spent long nights cramming, and before I knew it, I was standing on stage at my high school graduation with a diploma in hand. Grandma was in the audience, smiling proudly. Mom and Paul were nowhere to be seen. But by then, I'd learned not to expect much from them. As summer came, I focused on college applications, with Grandma's support and Dad cheering me on from afar. I aimed high. When the acceptance letters started arriving, I could hardly believe it. But the biggest surprise came when I opened the financial aid package for my top choice, full ride. I stared at the letter in disbelief. Grandma cheered and pulled me into a hug. I knew you could do it, kiddo. All those late nights and competitions paid off. I decided to major in business management. It seemed like the smart choice, especially now that I had the company to think about. I now had a company to run, and the idea still felt unreal, but I was determined to make Grandma proud. To celebrate my college acceptance, Grandma decided to throw a small party, just the two of us. We got some fancy takeout and a bottle of sparkling cider. Grandma wasn't about to let me drink champagne, even though I was an adult now. We were halfway through dinner when the doorbell rang. Grandma frowned, clearly not expecting anyone. "I'll get it," I said, putting down my fork. When I opened the door, my stomach sank. There stood my mother and Paul, looking annoyed and impatient. Before I could say anything, they pushed past me into the house. Mom didn't waste time on greetings. "Mother, we need to talk about the company." Now I stood there stunned as Mom launched into a rant. She didn't even look at me or ask about my graduation or college. It was like I wasn't even there. "Why can't we access the main accounts?" she demanded. "And why are you blocking the transfer of funds to our branch?" Grandma's expression hardened. "Because it's not your decision anymore, Kelly. The company belongs to Lily now. She's the one who will decide its future and manage its finances." The room went silent. I could feel the tension hanging in the air. After Grandma's words, I saw a wave of emotions cross Mom's face. First shock, then anger, and finally, something calculating. Suddenly, her whole attitude shifted. "Lily, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with fake kindness. "I've missed you so much. Why don't you come live with us?" I blinked, caught off guard by this sudden change. Mom stepped closer, reaching out like she wanted to touch my arm. Instinctively, I stepped back. "We've settled so nicely in the new city. We have a beautiful house, and there's a room just for you. We could set up a desk and get you a new computer for your studies and work." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "I'm happy here. I have my friends, my school, and Grandma needs me." Mom's smile wavered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Well, if that's the issue, we could always move back here. We could live in our old house just like before. Wouldn't that be nice?" I shook my head. "It's not about the house, Mom. It's about everything." I could see the anger building in her eyes, barely contained. Before she could say anything, I decided to ask the question that had been burning inside me for months. "Mom, why did you really divorce Dad?" She froze, taken aback. "Well, your father cheated on me multiple times. I got tired of it. He left us for his and didn't even pay alimony." "That's not true," I said quietly. "Dad told me everything. It only happened once, and it was because of how you treated him. He didn't abandon us. You kicked him out, and he's been paying alimony regularly." Mom's face twisted with anger. "How dare you? You ungrateful little brat. You have no right to interfere in my personal life. Everything here is mine, and I decide who lives where." Grandma, who had been quietly watching, finally stepped forward. Her voice was calm but firm, stronger than I had ever heard before. "That's enough, Kelly," she said. "You seem to have forgotten a few things. This house, the company, they belong to me, not you. I gave the company to Lily because I trust her judgment more than yours. Right now, I think it's time for you to leave." I watched with mixed emotions as Grandma firmly escorted Mom and Paul out of the house. The door clicked shut behind them, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I had lost something today, the last bit of hope I had about my mother. But I gained something too, a clear sense of my future, and the comfort of knowing I wasn't alone. "What now?" I asked, my voice muffled against Grandma's shoulder. She pulled back and gave me a small smile. "Now we get back to celebrating your college acceptance, and tomorrow we start planning for your real future, not the one your mother tried to force on you." The next morning, after the confrontation with Mom and Paul, I woke up to the sound of voices downstairs. Curious, I crept down the stairs and peeked into the living room. To my surprise, Dad was sitting on the couch, deep in conversation with Grandma. I sat down next to them, and Grandma explained why she had called Dad over. "I've been thinking about Olivia," she said. "Your mother. Well, I'm not sure she's in the best position to care for her right now. I've suggested your father seek custody of Olivia." I felt a surge of hope. "Really, Dad? Are you going to do it?" He ran his hand through his hair, looking both nervous and determined. "Yeah, I am. It won't be easy, but Olivia deserves better than what she's getting now." I couldn't help it. I threw my arms around him. "Thank you, Dad." As we pulled apart, Grandma cleared her throat. "There's more," she said. "I hired a private investigator to look into your mother and Paul's affairs." Over the next few weeks, life settled into a strange new rhythm. I started my college classes, diving into my studies with a focus I had never felt before. Dad started coming over regularly, and we worked on fixing our relationship. It felt good to have him back in my life. Then, about 2 weeks after that conversation, Grandma called us both over. Her face was serious as we sat down. "The investigator's report came in," she said, getting straight to the point. "And it's worse than we thought." She laid out the facts, each one hitting me like a punch. Mom had been cheating on Dad for years, long before the divorce. Her affair with Paul had started while she was still married to Dad. There were hotel receipts, records of expensive gifts, all of it painting a clear picture, but that wasn't even the worst part. "Paul is a con man," Grandma said, her voice firm. "He's done this before. He charms wealthy women, convinces them to move their money, and then runs off with it." I felt sick. "So when they wanted to move the company's money?" Grandma nodded. "Exactly. He was planning to steal it and disappear." We sat in silence, each lost in our thoughts. Finally, Grandma said we needed to confront Mom with the truth. We set the meeting for the next day. Mom arrived at Grandma's house looking annoyed and impatient. Her expression changed when she saw Dad was there too. What followed was one of the hardest conversations I've ever been part of. Grandma laid out all the evidence: the affair, Paul's history of fraud, and his plan to steal from the company. With each piece of information, I watched Mom's face, hoping to see some guilt or understanding, but all I saw was denial. "This is ridiculous," Mom said, sounding defensive. "Paul loves me. He would never do that. You're all just jealous of our happiness." Dad tried to reason with her. "Kelly, please look at the facts. Think about Olivia. Is this the kind of man you want around our daughter?" But Mom wouldn't listen. She stood up, her face red with anger. "I don't have to listen to this. Paul is a good man, and I trust him completely. You're all just trying to ruin my life." With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. As we sat there, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a long, hard battle. But looking at Dad and Grandma, I knew I wasn't facing it alone. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional ups and downs. With Grandma's strong support and her legal expertise, Dad filed for custody of Olivia. I tried to stay focused on my studies, but it was hard not to get distracted by everything happening around me. The day of the custody hearing came, and I insisted on being there. The whole thing was tough. Mom's lawyer tried to make Dad look like he wasn't involved in our lives, but our lawyer was ready. He showed proof of Dad's regular alimony payments, how he had tried to keep in touch with us, and the stable life he had now. Then came the big shock. The private investigators' report about Paul's criminal past and their plan to steal from the company. I watched Mom's face as the truth came out. First, she looked shocked, then angry, and finally lost. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. When the judge gave full custody of Olivia to Dad, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that Olivia would be safe, but also sadness that it had come to this. As we left the courthouse, Olivia in Dad's arms, Mom approached us. "This isn't over," she hissed, her eyes full of anger. Grandma stepped in between us. "Yes, Kelly, it is. Go home." Things only got worse for Mom after that. The judge ordered her to pay child support to Dad for Olivia. It was a huge shock for her since she'd always thought she'd be the one receiving support, not paying it. I threw myself into my studies and learning more about the company, trying to stay away from the family drama. But I couldn't help feeling a bit satisfied when I heard that Paul had left Mom, running off with another woman and a large chunk of Mom's personal savings. One evening in autumn, Dad called me. His voice was tense with emotion. "Your mother showed up at my place today," he said. "She wants to make up, said she made a mistake and wants us to be a family again." My heart tightened. Part of me, a small part, wanted him to say yes, wanted things to go back to how they used to be. But I knew better now. We'd all been through too much. I told her no, Dad said firmly. I told her that ship sailed a long time ago, and that I wouldn't put you or Olivia through that again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "Good," I said, surprised at how strong my voice sounded. "You deserve better, Dad. We all do." There was a pause, and then Dad spoke again. I could hear him smiling. "When did you get so wise, Lily?" I left feeling lighter than I had in a long time. I learned from the best. After I hung up the phone, I looked around my room at Grandma's house. My textbooks were scattered across the desk next to a stack of company reports, and photos of me with Dad and Olivia smiled back from the bulletin board. This wasn't the life I imagined a year ago. It wasn't perfect. There was still a lot to figure out and plenty of challenges ahead. But it was real. It was mine. I contemplated my mother, now by herself, following all of her schemes and deceit. I experienced some sympathy, but it was largely overshadowed by a feeling of justice. She had to cope with the fallout from the decision she had made. For my part, I had a loving family, a business to manage, and an exciting future. Though it wasn't the route I had anticipated, as I stood at the beginning of my new life, I realized something crucial. Time passed quickly while I managed a multi-million-dollar firm and attended college. I was immersed in textbooks and financial reports halfway through my degree before I realized it. Weekends were sacred, but the weekdays were full of lectures and late-night study sessions. I packed my bags and went home to Dad and Olivia every Sunday. Olivia would come running to me as soon as I stepped in, yelling, "Lily," and giving me a hug. She had big legs and endless energy when she was 12. Just in time for supper, Dad would emerge from the kitchen, generally donning an apron. Just in time for a meal, he'd grin. Those weekends turned into my compass. We'd sit down to supper together, Dad and I discussing about the company while Olivia talked animatedly about her school week. Dad and I used to frequently stay up late discussing business strategy after Olivia went to bed. We would spend Thursdays at Grandma's, where she would prepare a delicious meal and fill the home with the aroma of apple pie and roast chicken. We used to sit on the porch after lunch and talk about everything and nothing at all. When Grandma would squeeze my hand and say, "I always knew you had it in you, Lily." As graduation approached, I experienced mixed emotions. As promised, Dad was keeping the business running smoothly and getting me ready to take over. He said to me one evening, "I'm prepared to give the reins over whenever you are." I gave him a strong hug. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." Even with everything going wrong in life, there were still decisions to be made and a business to run. I knew, though, that my little family, Dad, Olivia, and Grandma, could handle anything as a unit.